All right. Hello, everyone. Let's give people a couple more minutes. But hello, nice to meet everyone. I'm Jane. I am a current 1L at Stanford. Would love to hear from or see in the chat, just where everyone else is calling from. I'm on the West Coast, California. Um, but yeah, Texas, Boston, Utah. Ooh, okay. LA. Okay, a few California folks. Love that. UK. Oh, wow. That's far. Is it late for y'all? Okay, from all over. Oh, wow. From Nigeria. Hey, y'all are really from all over. Incredible. Um, I myself am from Arizona, so love that. Um, okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. This is just for anyone with any questions about their law school apps, although I will also, of course, I'm happy to give some of my own insights as well. First, just some background on me. As I mentioned, I'm a current 1L at Stanford Law School. Before this, I was at Emory for undergrad, graduated in 2022, and then I did 1 year in management consulting at McKinsey in the Atlanta office, so real close to my university. And then the past year, I was in Taiwan as a Fulbright English teaching assistant. I really loved that experience. And I think both of those gave me a good mix of things to kind of bring to law school. And I've been, let's see, in classes, I think about 5 weeks now. It's been a great time, lots of work, but really loving it. So if you have questions about just like the first few weeks of law school or the first, quarter or semester, happy to answer those as well. Um, so before we start, I'll give kind of, just a spiel on like things to think about when you are prepping your materials. Um, I'll start with the essays because I feel like I offer a lot of advice on essays more specifically. With your essays, typically people write a personal statement and the statement of perspective, which used to be called a diversity statement. With those, I think my main piece of advice is to make sure you like, keep each essay cohesive. Don't try to throw too much into it. You want it to still stay memorable in your admissions officers' minds. And then let's see for other parts. I mean, for resumes, I know people like to ask, oh, should it be 1 page? Should it be 2 page? I kept mine to 1 page just because I was like, I don't know if I've done 2 pages worth of stuff. But I think a lot of schools are very happy with 2 pages as well. And then recommendation letters, just ask your professors earlier rather than later. Um, I also know a lot of schools prefer at least two academic recommenders, but if you've been out of school for a while, I think they, are very happy with one as well. Um, but yeah, that's my like general picture. I would love to get some more detailed questions from y'all. You can either raise your hand and then come off mute, or send them in the chat. Either one works. All right, Chase.
Hi, thank you so much for putting this together tonight. I really appreciate it. So one of the applications I'm working on is for Stanford, and they have an optional essay
Hmm.
on that says like law school is about like being around people with different viewpoints and like,
Hmm.
collaborating with people. Um, and the question is essentially like describe a time you met someone or like you came across like a viewpoint that was different from yours, like what did you
Hmm.
do and like what would you do differently today? So I
Mm.
guess I am looking for like any advice you might have about that essay because I feel like that struggling a little bit to think through like an example that can, fill up a page or two,
Yeah.
or like thinking through an example that's like salient enough.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I feel like the question is a little broad.
Hmm.
And like some things are some things you think about in that situation are very like small things. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, and I think those prompts are newer in light of I think a lot of universities now are a little concerned about the campus climate that they have. And so they want to kind of ask people um, how they deal with disagreement before, which is an interesting approach. I think, I mean, I would first start with the like disagreement portion, of course. Think of times when you've like disagreed with people, you have kind of, an idea to start with. And then in terms of filling up the page, um, I think it's similar to any other essay where you write about some experience you had, your responses to it, or like what you felt about it initially, how you responded to it, and like what you took from it, into the future. The one thing I caution, of course, with these like, civil disagreement type prompts, is you need to strike the right balance between like, oh, yes, we disagreed, but not like coming off with a tone of, and clearly this other person was wrong. Um, I think it will serve you a lot better if your like readers have a sense that, you know, maybe you had this initial like, oh, visceral reaction of like that goes against, what I believe. And yet coming from a perspective of, okay, it's, I want to make an effort to understand this. I still disagree with it in the end, that's fine. Um, but I think emphasizing that understanding is a good way to approach it. And I think if you like write enough about that, it'll fill up, like a paragraph or two, and then that'll start to fill up a page or two. Does that help?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And then I'll take one from the chat. I'm gonna kind of go like chat and then hands raised, chat and then hands raised. So there's a question in the chat. Are there scholarships for 2-year JD for those applying as international? I'm looking for schools that offer these. Ooh, okay. I don't uh, have a ton of experience with the scholarships. Off the top of my head, I know Stanford has the Knight Hennessy, which I think covers all 3 years, although it is definitely a very competitive program. Also, to clarify, you say 2-year JD. Do you just mean like 2 years of the JD, or if there are 2-year JD programs? Because the JDs are all 3 years. Um, but yeah, sorry, I don't have a ton of advice on that one. I think there's I don't know if you're international or if you're like immigrant. I know there's a Paul and Daisy Soros fellowship that is for it's like US immigrants and children of immigrants, and I think that covers quite a bit of money as well. If y'all want to look into that. Does that help at all? Sorry, I don't know a ton about scholarships for the JD. Um, Although one thing I would advise actually is like there are lots of schools that give merit-based aid if you're like, oh, above their medians and your essay is great. And so I think casting a wide net can help with finding scholarships. Sorry, that was not the most focused answer, but I'm going to stick with the last thing, which is if you cast a wider net um, with the schools that you apply to, um, like applying to schools where you're like at median, oh, maybe the scholarship opportunities are not as robust, but if you cast a wider net, it should. Let's see, Sophie.
Hi, Jane. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this. I have a question about what's your perspective on doing like a 1-year master's program to boost your GPA if you're applying to law school and your GPA isn't in the range of like any of the schools that you want to go to?
Ooh, good question. So one thing I'll say for sure is I think a master's program is quite an expensive way to boost GPA, and I think like the use that more people get out of it is like, oh, I have this experience that now I want to, write my essays about. Um, I think it would have to depend on how much it would. I also, and apologies. I did not do a master's, so I'm not 100% sure. But definitely look closely into the way that LSAC calculates their GPA because I know it is a bit different from how schools do it on their own. And so I don't know if they consolidate both your undergrad and your master's into like their GPA calculation, or if they weight them differently. But yeah, one thing I would say is if it's mostly for the GPA boost, look into how that's calculated first because it might not give as much of a boost as you think.
Mhm.
And then like also ask like, okay, am I interested in like the experience that I would get from this? Would I be able to write an essay about this? Because if you do the master's and then you apply after, um, it's like, oh, you did this thing for a year. It would be a bit odd not to write about it. Um, so I would also consider that.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then in the chat, Rick, let's see, how did you think about bridging your experience at McKinsey for law? Did you try to make it law relevant or did you keep it as you would for a business resume? Oh, good question. Okay, so I'll approach this from the from the resume and essay perspective. From the essay perspective, I will say I applied and then deferred a year. So when I applied to law school, I had only been at McKinsey for like 2 or 3 months, and I was like on the beach or like not on a project for like a good 4 to 6 weeks of that. So I didn't write a ton about or really anything about consulting in my personal statement because I was like, oh, I haven't been here long enough. But I did put what experience I could on my resume. I don't think I approached it super differently from applying to business jobs. Like a lot of the verbs on like leadership and analysis are still the same, but maybe you just change like, oh, make it less numbers focused and more like conceptual, little things like that. But it was still only one experience on my resume. Let's see, Victoria.
Hi there. Thank you for doing this. My question is tailored around the school that you chose and
Mhm.
how that influenced your application materials. So, can you speak to the amount of information that you included about Stanford in your application materials, specifically your essay or any of the addendums?
Oh, the answer to this is zero. I did not mention Stanford. I think actually in my diversity statement, because it was still called that at the time, I like had a little line that I would switch out for every school that it was like, and I would love to bring this to Stanford Law School, to Columbia Law School, to like Harvard Law School, to NYU School of Law. But other than that, I did not tailor any of my essays specifically to a school. I figured admissions officers would understand that all of us need to apply to multiple schools and don't have that kind of time to do that for everyone. The one thing that, of course, I would tailor school specific is if they ask for a why school essay, just make that one specific enough to the school, like, oh, why Penn, why NYU. But yeah, otherwise I did not make my personal statement specific to Stanford at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then from the chat again, in writing our personal statement, is it better to write about one specific experience in detail and then show how it shaped us and tie it in to how law school serves as the best next step, or focus on several 2 to 3 experiences and then tie in law school? Oh, so I've actually seen a lot of different approaches to this. I think people whose experiences are like more spread out, where it's like, oh, I did one thing in like science and I did another thing in like activism and another one in, something completely different. I think a lot of people then will pick one area for their essay and then pick a different area for like their statement of perspective, just to help focus it. For me, I noticed that a lot of my like experiences in college were centered around things like across the aisle political dialogue and um, like civil disagreement, thinking from multiple perspectives. And so I like talked about, 2 experiences in more detail and then had like a paragraph at the end where I was like, oh, I took what I learned from those experiences and applied it here and here and here and here, just to kind of show that trend. But I've seen a lot of different kinds of things work. I think it would depend on your experience. Does that make sense? Like if you can tie a bunch of experiences to one theme, great, go for it. If you're like, all of these are kind of disparate, but like they like still shape who I am, then consider writing about each one in a separate essay. Does that help? Okay. And then let me see. Elizabeth?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for hosting this session. I have two questions and I'll make it brief if you don't mind. My first question is regarding what would you say would be a recommended number of schools to apply to for target reach and safety? And my second question is what best practices would you provide for preparing for an admission interview? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Number of schools. I think people try to apply to like 10 to 15. I remember my year I applied to 7 and my law school advisor advised against that, was like, don't do that. And then I didn't listen because I was tired. But I think the common number is 10 to 15. And then in terms of preparing for interviews, yeah, so I remember I had one, no, I had 2 interviews. One of them I had like I went to the interview, I had bronchitis. I did not prepare well enough for it, but it gave me a lot of insight on what I should have prepared for it. And it's that if they're interviewing you, I think at some point in the interview, they will ask you like why you want to go to their school specifically. Definitely look into preparing that answer well. They'll probably also ask you why you want to go to law school. And then the rest is just like thinking through your experiences. Like if someone had your resume in front of them and was going to ask you about like, oh, could you tell me about this? Just like kind of at least be able to give like a one sentence theme about your most important experiences. Um, and all of that being said, I wouldn't like over prepare. Definitely like look into the like why this specific school type of, questions. But these law school interviews are not like med school interviews. They're like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So it's like more of a vibe check than anything else. A vibe check and like a check on how interested you are in their school and like what you would contribute to it. So I think those are the main things I would consider. It's just that the interview's short, it's a vibe check, but remember like why do you want to go to their school specifically?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let's see, from the chat, do you know how law schools view graduate work, specifically graduate school withdrawals? I think that's definitely something you would want to address in an addendum. I don't think there's any like hard and fast rule about like you withdraw, it's denied. But I think you'd want to be like very um, like conscious of how you're explaining that. And then let's see. Oh wait, I was about to talk about graduate work, but I think this is specifically on graduate school withdrawals. Yeah, just explain it like in your addendum. Don't over explain, just be very straightforward about like, oh, here were the reasons. Um, and then I think the only thing I can think of is it might have some impact on your GPA, which schools do unfortunately still care quite a bit about. Um, does that help answer that? I realize I'm like asking this and everyone's on mute, so might not know. But yeah, the gist of that is address it in an addendum, be clear, but not like overly like making any excuses or anything like that. Just this is what happened so that you have an explanation. Next question in the chat. What advice can you give to be included as core information in a personal essay for an applicant who had a low grade in university and a distinction grade in law school after graduation? Wait, sorry, I'm a bit confused about this question. You already been to law school? Or I'll just talk about the like low grade in university. Sorry, that's the part that I'm able to address. Um, I wouldn't spend your like personal statement trying to explain like a low GPA. I would leave that for the addendum and then just let your personal statement speak for like the experiences that you had that were, you know, positive, that shaped you as a person. Yeah, I would leave the grades for the addendum. Oh, I see. Oh, you might be applying to like LLM programs, or JD programs in the US, actually could be either. Um, I think then you can like focus more, like if there were certain initiatives you did in the law school that were like very impactful to you, you can focus more on that. But the GPA thing, it's like they'll see it regardless. Like don't spend your energy or time in the personal statement, like trying to mitigate that. That's use an addendum for that. Let's see. Another question, what's your opinion about applying in early February with a higher LSAT score? Do I have a chance getting into schools like USC? I mean, this would of course depend on, like this would depend on, oh, how much higher the LSAT is. I do know the general advice people like to give is, oh, apply before Thanksgiving if you can. I will say one bit of good news for you is I think that the timeline is mattering less and less. Because I think every cycle you see like these law schools kind of just decide like if they're sure about someone and they apply early, they'll let them in earlier. But if they were going to be on the fence about you anyways, like it doesn't matter if you applied in September, they'll keep you waiting until like May, which is like kind of sucky on their part, but it happens that way. So I think it would depend on how much higher the LSAT is. Like if you could, you know, get your LSAT score like, oh, well above median and then you apply in early February, I don't think that matters. I know plenty of people at Stanford who, you know, applied well past the new year. But if it's like, oh, I raised it by 1 point and then I applied in February, that might not be the most advisable. Let's see, what should I focus on more for my diversity statement that maybe I should not go into full detail on my personal statement? So I think the key with any of these essays is to avoid too much overlap because then you're just like wasting word count. So for example, like a lot of people, the approach they take is they say, oh, my personal statement already kind of fits the bill for a statement of perspective or a diversity statement. So I don't need to write a diversity statement. My personal opinion on that is like, if you have an opportunity to write 2 essays and show 2 different aspects of yourself, like take it, you know, maybe let the diversity statement be the diversity statement, and then for your personal statement, write about something different. But yeah, keep the experiences distinct. That's what I'd say there. Let's see. Then how would you recommend someone stand out in their personal statement? Yeah, great question on this one. So the key thing I think, first of all, is the focus. Like if you try and cover too much and then you're like admissions advisor after reading your essays, like I cannot pinpoint what this essay was about. Like I can't summarize it in 1 sentence. I can't like this person, you know, when I like think of their essay, I don't have like a tag like, oh, it's the person who talked about, you know, uh, trying to think of like examples. Oh, it's the person who talked about like the Asian Student Center initiative on their campus. If you don't have something like that because you wrote too much, I think that's not so great. So keep it focused. And then I think it's also like keep it true to your style. So I know a lot of people are concerned about like, oh, I read all these essays online and they're like so narrative and so beautiful, and I don't write like that. If you don't write like that, like don't try to write like that. Like I also write in a very explanatory fashion. I just kind of had some thoughts about my like different undergraduate and work experiences that I put on paper and was like, yeah, I went into this because of this, and afterwards I left with these reflections, and this led me to do this. It was very like logical like that, and I think it gives people a glimpse into how you think. So those I think would be my 2 main pieces of advice, or just keep it focused and then keep it true to your style. Let's see. And then what would you say has been the best advice you've received / given in regard to improving your LSAT score / getting a high score, not applying the cycle, but wanting to get your insight? Oh, actually, okay, this one, there's a limited supply of LSAT prep tests. Do not waste them. Like you think like, oh, they're in the like, I don't know, 90s or like hundreds by now. There's plenty of them, but it's like the ones before like prep test number, I don't know, it's like 75 or 80 or something, are just not the same as they are today. Like the older ones are definitely easier. Um, and so you have a limited number of the more recent, like applicable LSAT prep tests to practice with. Don't waste them in the beginning. Like practice drilling all of your questions first. And then when you think like, oh, I'm at a point where like I'm starting to hit like, oh, I've hit like, 80% of my ability or something, then you can start practicing with the full test. Practice under timed conditions, practice under like real LSAT conditions, and then go from there. Yeah, so don't waste the prep test, practice under time conditions, and drill before you do any of that. How long did I prepare for the LSAT? Okay, I prepared 6 weeks. I don't advise that approach. I just like did LSAT for 6 weeks straight. I think the more typical amount is like at least like 4 months or at least like 6 months even. I think it's like 4 months to a year is very typical. So yeah, don't do what I did. And depending on your finances as well, like make sure you're like well prepared before you take it. Um, Especially just because after you take it a certain number of times, like you're tired of it, your admissions officer is going to be like, oh, why did you take it like 4 times? So if you can avoid that, but also I think their understanding of like things happen. Let's see, what specific advice would you give to a first generation immigrant / college graduate with a 4.0 undergrad GPA, below median LSAT score, and works within a legal field on how to craft a personal statement that highlights unique challenges and experiences to strengthen their law school application? So one thing I would say is when you're crafting your essay, like no need to think about the GPA and the LSAT. Like those will just be what they are. Um, you should not craft your essay with any of that in mind, right? Because it will also color the way that you're writing. Like you want to write with confidence. And you write in the same way you would write any, application essay, which is you reflect on your experiences. A lot of times it helps to have your resume in front of you and kind of think, okay, which of these activities did I like the most? What did I get out of them? Like, how have they shaped me as a person? Like, especially if you think of yourself from like freshman year to like wherever you are now, like you've definitely changed a lot. Ask yourself like, okay, so what changed me aside from just the passage of time? What activities did I do that, made me who I am today, made me hopefully better than how I was however many years ago? And how did it do that? Then go from there. Let's see. I have another question. What would you recommend for preparing for law school? What should I prepare for university and later on in law school? What things should I be aware of and what opportunities are useful? Okay, I'm assuming this question is coming from like, you're not like a senior in university already, that you're like earlier on in the college career and trying to prepare. Um, I think like the most you can do in the early years is just make sure you're keeping up on your schoolwork. Because I feel like as much as law schools love to be like, it's not all numbers, it's a lot of numbers. And so keep your grades up and then also just make sure like you're being active on campus, that you're like participating in like various student organizations or in, the city that your school is in. Just doing something outside of school that like enriches you as a person, that like helps you grow and then ultimately like is something you can write about in a very compelling way. So like early on, don't stress too much about, oh, I need to do all the perfect things. I need to do specific activities. Like I didn't join pre-law society. I didn't join mock trial. I had like a brief stint in student government and I was like, oh, actually, I don't like this. And I just like found things that I was interested in, which was like, oh, Asian American activism and like that kind of across the aisle political dialogue. But yeah, find things you're interested in and keep your grades up. Oh, and don't like prep for the LSAT like 3 years in advance. Like, prep for it like a year before you take it. Because again, those prep tests are limited. How did you know which law schools to apply to and what the law schools are looking for? Did you choose based on your GPA or LSAT or preference? All three. I did look at like, okay, what are the schools, medians and, you know, where I fit in. I did not have a super like discerning selection process. I and he should have a more discerning selection process than I did. I went on US News and was like top 7 sweep. I don't recommend that as an approach because then you don't actually know anything about the schools. You're just like, okay, I'm doing whatever it feels like I'm supposed to do. In terms of what they're looking for, I think honestly, most law schools are all looking for very similar things, which is they want to know like why you want to go to law school. And there's a lot of different ways to show that. Maybe you're interested in a particular area of law and you have experiences that like, support that. Or maybe like you have had a lot of experiences that shape the way you think and you think, oh, I think my thought processes would serve me very well in law school. I think I have a skill set for law school. Like I would do well in law school. Um, I think those are the main approaches that I see. Did you do a general personal statement for all your law school applications or tailored to each? Yeah, I did a general one. What should guide your school selection and application? Okay. So that, can I make a short poem as part of the statement? You can, like, there's nothing you can't do technically. I think the caveat I would say is like in my mind, the very narrow scenario where I see that working well is if you like have previous like award-winning poetry experience, and it makes sense to put some of that skill in your essay to show someone else. But otherwise, like poems logistically take up a lot of lines without covering very much content. So I don't typically recommend that. And then Chase, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, so I had a quick question about supplemental essays. So I'm kind of going through the process of applying right now, and there's a lot of supplemental essays to write. So I was just wondering, you kind of approach like doing where they're kind of like a couple that you like started with, and then kind of for other schools you like kind of try to rework the earlier ones. Yeah, what was your approach to that? Because I'm a little overwhelmed, I guess, right now.
Oh, yeah. One thing I'll say is if a school is like, here's 8 prompts, choose up to 4, you don't need to write 4. Like, unless you're like really into the school, you're like, I really want to go to the school, I really want to show them how committed I am, like, go for it. I will say though, I think it's advisable if they have optional essays to write at least one, just so they're like, oh, this person like took the effort that I asked for to like do something special for me. Like for Stanford, I think when I applied, they had like it's like 4 prompts, choose 2. I chose one just because the other 3 I was like, I don't think I can write very well about them. And it worked out all right. So I would say like, yeah, write at least one just to show like, hey, you wanted some like special attention to an essay. I have given that. But like, yeah, it's not feasible all the time to be like, I'm gonna write 4 extra essays for all 10 schools. Like that's too much. Let's see. How many points do you think it is possible to increase in 1 month for LSAT? I could not say. Like if you like are just starting and then it's like, oh, how much can I increase in 1 month? It's probably greater than like, oh, I've been practicing for 8 months. How much can I increase in the 9th month? So that would depend. I think mine increased in the span of 6 weeks by like not quite 10 points, 9 points. But I am not the gold standard on that. I have seen plenty of people who are like, oh yeah, my LSAT score increased like 15 points, you know. So I could not say on that. Let's see, what is one thing you would change about your application process, specifically in regards to writing your personal statement? Ooh, this is a tough question because I have the benefit of hindsight bias, which is that I really love where I am right now. So I'm like, oh, it worked out great. Let's see. What is one thing I would change? I don't know. I think there are certain things about interviews that like I would like to change, or I like would have liked to change at the time, but couldn't just because of circumstances. I think, yeah, sorry, I don't have the best answer to this one. Um, let's see. Oh, someone has asked, what should guide your school selection and application for JD program? Oh, okay. What should guide your school selection? Great question. If you have the opportunity to talk to people at the schools and get a sense of the vibes, that would be like a very, good thing to do. Um, I think finances are also really important for a lot of people. So look into each school's like financial aid as well as their like merit scholarships. If you think, oh, this school, like I could qualify for some merit aid and that would really make a difference. Um, yeah, like if you're like, I want the merit aid, you're gonna have a different school list than if you're just like, no, I want to get into like the best law school that I can, whatever that means for me. Um, so I think finances, talking to people at the schools, which I think will also help you to write like a why X school essay. And then I think certain schools, like people like to look at their employment rates. I think that's a pretty important thing to do. Like if there's a certain area of law you want to go into and you notice, oh, this school sends a lot of people in that direction, that can sometimes be more informative than just like pure rankings. Um, yeah. And then I have, let's see, another question here on what would you say Stanford Law School's culture is? Um, I quite like it. I think it's got something to do with that like West Coast vibe. Also, I just wanted to tell everyone, like, I realize we're over time. I totally didn't see. So if you don't have time, feel free to drop off. And then on my part, I think I'll probably still be here another like 5-ish minutes. Um, but in terms of Stanford Law School's culture, um, and oh, actually, sorry, guys, I wanted to advertise this. But in terms of Stanford Law School's culture, so I quite like it. I think it benefits a lot from that West Coast like chill vibe. Like I'm not gonna be like, oh, it's like totally chill because of course it's a lot of people who are in their first like quarter who are just like trying their best. They want to get like good grades. We work really hard. Um, but I don't think like I like how very like genuine it is. I think um like people are honest about how hard they're working and like what they're struggling with. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's been a great part of it. Um, and then, oh, hang on, let me see. I'm trying to answer some of the DMs as well. But okay, I think it sounds like we've gotten to most of everyone's questions. I just want to plug this here. So I offer some, like application counseling to help with essays. I will say I'm like, the reason it's like discounted on hourly coaching is because I'm a bit at capacity package wise. But if you're like, oh, I'm in the last stages of my essay, I would love to just get someone to look over it for like an hour or two. Feel free to use this code in the next week. I also will probably be taking my profile off from public after the next week. So keep that in mind. Um, uh, but yeah, other than that, thanks everyone for stopping by. I will like just remain for like a couple more minutes. Um, but yeah, glad that everyone could make it. Sorry, I'm trying to answer some like DMs and I have the really annoying camera. Oh, someone asked, how much is my coaching? So mine is 75 an hour. And then with the 10% off, minus 7.5. But yeah, if you want to schedule an intro call with me, feel free to scan the QR code. And then yeah, and honestly, on the intro call, if you're like, oh, finances are an issue for me, like we can talk through and see what else we can do. But yeah, thank you everyone for hopping onto this. Stop share. Oh, actually, I probably shouldn't have done that. Okay. All right. I may end the call soon. But thank you, everyone.
Hi, I had one more question.
Oh
Um,
yeah, go for it.
And thank you so much. This has been really helpful. From your experience, like being at Stanford and just like what you've heard from other students and like what you know about admissions now after doing it yourself,
Mhm.
what would you say is like the probability of if your GPA is like on the lower end and like the 3.5 to 3.6 range, what is like the probability of like T14 schools not even looking at your application because your GPA isn't in their median?
So I don't think it's ever going to be like they don't look at your application. They will definitely look at it. Um, like it's like the way I would say it is like obviously for most people a lower GPA would be an uphill battle, but it's like still possible, right? Like if you feel you have like very compelling like work experiences or personal life experiences, you definitely want to like maximize on like the essay writing to just like highlight that because every year it's like true a lot of these schools will accept people with below median like test scores or GPAs. That's just how they compose their class, right? Median is the middle for a reason. It's because there's people above and below. Um, and like depending on how low um like I don't think like oh if you're like below 3.0 that might be like prohibitively low. If you're like still in the like you know 3.5 3.6 3.7 or
Mhm.
like 3.4 3.5 3.6 3.7 type of range, like I think it's like still very possible. It's just that it would be more of an uphill battle. Your essays would have to matter a lot, and if you could get your LSAT score like well above their median, then that could also help you a lot.
Okay.
Because a lot of schools will think like, okay, I want some of the higher LSAT scores. I will sacrifice on like GPA for this one person.
And would you say that like it's better I'm asking because I recently got advice from one of my professors telling me to like go to a master's to have like a better GPA academically and focus on getting my LSAT up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they were like, don't just focus on your LSAT, like because you want to make sure that your GPA also it shows that you're like academically rigorous. And
Mm,
that's why like I wasn't thinking about it before, but now I'm kind of thinking about it now of like, should
mm.
I do a master's? Should I not? So yeah, I'm still just thinking about that.
I think I would say like I'll stress like especially just for the GPA, I think that's a very unorthodox route to go just because I know master's programs are quite expensive. Um, if you could get scholarship for it, that would of course help a lot. But a lot of people definitely come into law school with a master's program. Like I think they get a lot out of the experience. Um, and yeah, I think like it sounds like then this professor also has, I don't have experience with the master's program, which is why I don't quite know. Um, but they probably understand like how the LSAC calculates the GPA, whereas for me it's always been kind of a black box. Um, so I would look into because like what you don't want to do is say, oh, I only went for this GPA, and then turns out like LSAC splits my undergrad and graduate GPA, and like oh, the schools only take like one of them or something, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if that's what they do. I'm not saying that is. I don't quite know. But look into how they calculate it first. Um, and then if your like finances would allow, and you think like, oh, the experience would be good, and you think, oh, it's not going to eat into like the LSAT prep time, then yeah, you can definitely consider it. Um, but I do think the LSAT is the most straightforward method. Like
Okay.
if you could get a really high LSAT score, which is a big if, um, just because those like high LSAT scores are limited. There's a curve,
Mhm.
which is unfortunate. Um, but yeah, if you could get a really high LSAT score, I think that would help. And yeah, sure, like if the master's degree would actually raise your like LSAC GPA, that could be an option.
Okay, that's really good to know. I'm gonna look it up tonight. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. With that, I will go ahead and end the call. But yeah, thanks for hopping on.